So during the summer and the fall, I've been working on what I think is a big new feature coming to Sofa, and that's the ability to listen to podcasts in Sofa. So Sofa is essentially becoming also a podcast player in addition to everything else that it does. And for the past month or so, actually a little bit more than a month, I've been using it as my primary podcast player, and I I love it. I love it. It's great. So in this video, I'm going to show you a little demo about how it works and how I've been using it. But I'm also going to give a little context into why I'm doing this and kind of why I'm bundling it into Sofa as opposed to making a completely separate app. And I'll give some details about when this will be coming out. All right, so I'm going to give a really quick demo of how this works in Sofa. So if you don't know what Sofa is, really quick. So it's an app and tool that helps you to be more intentional with your downtime. So you can create lists of books you want to read, movies you want to watch, video games you want to play, those kinds of things. And you've been able to add podcasts to Sofa for many years at this point. You just haven't been able to listen to podcasts in Sofa. So that's really what the new thing is here. So any podcast you add into Sofa now will essentially go and fetch new episodes and allow you to listen to those episodes, which is pretty cool. All right, so if we think about how you can add podcasts, so I'm just going to go into some list and show you. So there's 2 podcasts in here, and then I can add more podcasts. I can search for different podcasts. So let me just search for something like that. Right. So then you can add that podcast. And again, you've always been able to do this, but now since you're adding podcasts, it'll go and fetch new podcast episodes, which is really exciting. Okay. So the way this works is there's this new part of the app called Up Next, and you kind of see that right here. And what this does is it looks across all the lists that you have. And if there are any podcasts that you have, it'll fetch new episodes and it kind of pull them all together. So if you tap into this, you can see these are all the podcast episodes that you have to listen to. And if I tap on one of these,
what's happening? It's Todd McShay and I'm back with a new home.
I can start listening. And from this view, I can, change the listening speed. I can see show notes for this. And if you have like ingredients and stuff like that, all those ingredients will work with these podcast episodes. And then, you get different actions and stuff like that. But as you're listening, you can leave this view and you see like a little mini player come up at the bottom. And then you can just kind of navigate around, do what you normally do with Sofa. And then you can open this up, close it, and then all that stuff will still play in the background as you're doing things. Now, this Up Next view is actually pretty cool because it'll show you what's currently playing at the top there. And then you can have different ways to essentially sort this stuff. So you can sort, the newest ones to the oldest ones. You can do by like the duration. So if you want to say like, hey, show me the shortest ones first, it'll do that. Or if you want, you can essentially just like manually sort these things to kind of create your own Up Next little playlist here, which is really nice. Now, so that's kind of like the main Up Next view, which is great. And again, that aggregates all podcast episodes across all of your list. But you probably saw this earlier. Up Next is also essentially like localized to lists. So you'll notice I have a couple different lists of podcasts, so like entertainment and tech. Now, if I tap into entertainment, you'll see that it just shows me these 3 podcasts that I have in my entertainment list, but I have Up Next up here. And if I tap into Up Next, it'll only show me episodes related to those podcasts. So essentially, this is creating like custom playlists automatically for you, depending how you kind of organize your list in Sofa. And, you can play those things. So if I go to, say, my tech podcast list, so you see I have 4 different podcasts here. And if I tap into Up Next, it's showing podcasts for all of those shows, which is pretty cool. And what's really nice is that this just fits so well into how Sofa already works and how it's already organized. So, one of the primary features of Sofa is the logbook, where you can essentially keep track of the things that you've watched, read, played, listened to, all that kind of stuff. And the logbook fits into listening to podcasts very easily. So essentially, by default, anytime you finish an episode, it'll get logged to the logbook here. So if I actually go in here, and if I say, add to logbook, which it would do that automatically once the episode is finished, it'll get added to the logbook here. And then I can open this, get all the details. I can listen to it again if I want. And again, this kind of functions in a very, very similar way to everything else that you add into Sofa. And then, of course, there's going to be a bunch of features for power users, essentially. So this is kind of geared towards keeping things very, very simple. And that's going to be great for the majority of people. But if you want to customize things a little bit, there are going to be new settings specifically for podcasts. So number one, if you do not want to listen to podcasts in Sofa at all, you can simply just turn it off. No big deal. So if you're like, you know what, this is too much. I just want to use Sofa for like movies and TV. I don't want to use it for podcasts. That's not a problem. You can just turn it off. And honestly, if you never add a podcast to Sofa, it won't use these features anyway. But it gives you some global settings, so you can choose like the duration for seeking forward or seeking back and how that kind of works. You can choose a default playback speed. And then when you finish an episode, you can choose, does it go automatically to the logbook, or do you just want to mark it as played? And then there's some other things. So like you can manage your storage. So, you can see my total storage here is super high, but that's because this is a test device. But what happens is after you finish listening to an episode, it deletes the file that it downloaded. So, your storage should be managed pretty well. But if you need to, you can go in and individually delete stuff. But then you have the option to set settings for podcasts individually. So if I go to, say, Connect It, number one, you can just not subscribe to new episodes. So if you toggle this off, Sofa will not look for new episodes for that podcast. So say you do want to keep a list of podcasts, but you don't want to necessarily listen to them or fetch new episodes, you can just toggle it off, and then it won't look for any new episodes. You can have it set for, auto download new episodes, and that's auto downloading the audio file, so you can listen to it offline. You can choose like how many episodes at a time you want to download here, and then when you're finished, where does this go? Right? Does it go to the logbook? Does it not go there? That kind of thing. And then you have the option to delete the podcast. You can see the feed and all that kind of stuff. And this works with like custom and like private RSS feeds. So if there's certain podcasts that you listen to that you pay for and they give you a custom URL, like you can add all of those. And then you obviously have the option to import your podcast from another app, or export podcasts from Sofa and import those into different apps. I do want to show you one more thing. So if you listen to a podcast that has chapters and different chapter artwork and stuff like that, it will work with that. So you can see that the player now updated to show different chapters and chapter artwork. So if chapters are available, you'll have the option to kind of navigate through those things and jump around as you want. You can use these buttons to go back and forth between that. And then if there's like chapter artwork, it'll update automatically as you're listening.
So the next question is, why am I even making a podcast app or building a podcast player into Sofa? I mean, honestly, it does kind of, I know this isn't a separate app, but it kind of feels like I'm building another app just inside of an existing app, because there's a lot of work involved with this. But when I think about like, why go after something like a podcast player? Why make something like this? And it kind of comes down to two things. One is like my own personal preference and use of listening to podcasts and different podcast apps. And then the other is kind of more of a business strategic decision in terms of Sofa. So the first one is I listen to a lot of podcasts, And I have used many podcast players over the years, many different apps, and they all have various pros and cons. And I'm not going to like call any out by name on this. That's not really fair because everyone has different preferences. But I would say that for the way that I prefer to listen to podcasts, I have never been like fully satisfied with any existing players out there. I think a lot of times when you're making a dedicated podcast app, there's a lot of stuff in there that I don't need. I kind of just want a simple list of episodes to listen to, and then that's kind of it. All the other stuff is just kind of extra. I tend to ignore it, but I kind of sometimes in different apps have to like fight through those things just to get to the simple list of podcasts that I want to listen to. So that's kind of the main thing. So I feel like I've never personally been satisfied with podcast players. The second one is more like kind of like a strategy business type thing, product decision. And that's because I kind of feel like if you think about what Sofa is today, so it's this downtime organizer for your non-work stuff, right? And it started with very specific things like movies and books. And then I added podcasts into it. You have been able to add a podcast to Sofa for a long time. You couldn't really do anything with it. Like, I had links to different podcast players, but you couldn't listen to anything in there. But the idea was like, oh, you heard about a podcast and maybe you don't know if you want to listen to it. So you don't want to add it to like your podcast player. So you just add it to Sofa and maybe listen to it later. But then I've added more and more stuff to Sofa where at this point, you can basically add anything to it, right? With saving links into it, you can create your own custom categories and that kind of stuff. And the idea behind that is because your downtime and how people use their downtime are not just about the media they consume, right? It's not just about the shows they watch or even the podcasts that they listen to, right? It could be the trips they want to take, or maybe they go hiking, or the places they want to go eat and hang with friends, that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of creating more of like this, almost like this bundle, right? Like, and I'm going to talk about this in another section about like the pros and cons of like building this into a single app versus multiple apps. But I see Sofa as like kind of this bundle for your downtime where you can have all these different things that you want to do and different ways you want to do them, and Sofa can kind of be the hub for that stuff, or a hub for that stuff. And being able to listen to podcasts in that context, to me, fits in very naturally. It's like, well, if you've already saved a podcast in here, you can start listening to it. It can fetch new episodes and all that kind of stuff. And it's just simpler for kind of everybody involved. The other thing is like podcasts I love podcasts. I've been listening to podcasts for so long. And there is a part of me that it's like, I already use Sofa for this stuff. Why not also listen to podcasts in here? Like I really do think that it fits in very naturally with the way that Sofa is already designed and organized. You have your kind of different lists that you can create. So those can be different playlists if you want. The way that you can add stuff to the logbook, and the way you can add sticky notes and all that. Like, to me, a podcast episode and being able to listen to all that stuff just, I think, fits in very naturally.
One of the things I wanted to talk about is why I'm not making this a separate app and why I'm kind of bundling this into Sofa. Because when you think about it, like, you hear a podcast player, and that sounds like it could and should be its own separate app, not thrown into another app. And I've thought about it a lot, and I wanted to share some of my thoughts. So first is that getting people to download an app is very hard, like extremely hard. Getting awareness, building a brand, all that stuff, like so hard. Getting people to download multiple apps is even harder. So when I really thought through the, just like the mechanics of it, bundling this into Sofa just makes it easier to get people to download a single app versus multiple apps. That alone doesn't make it good just to do it, right? But if you think about just how people consume apps today and think about apps and use apps, fewer apps is actually a little bit easier now because there's such an abundance of them. The next thing is that it makes the Super Sofa subscription more valuable and more attractive. So there's a bunch of things that you get as part of the Super Sofa subscription, and I'm going to be adding more to that now with the podcast player. So I haven't fully figured out what is going to be free and what is going to be paid for the podcast player, but I do know that the basic I want to listen to podcasts, that will be free. So you'll be able to do that. But there's going to be parts of that experience that are paid and will require the Super Sofa subscription. And by adding all that stuff in, it just makes that whole package just better and more valuable for people. The next thing is kind of related to the first one, but this is around building a brand. And today, I mean, it's always been very difficult to build a brand, right? It takes a lot of time, a lot of consistency, money, a good product, all those things. And when I think about the mechanics of, okay, so if I did a separate app, what would I call that app? Would it be an extension of the Sofa brand, or would it be a new brand? And how would all that stuff work? And then I have to spend a lot of time getting people to know that brand, right? And there's just a lot of complexity involved with that kind of stuff. So when I thought through it, it's the Sofa brand is by no means huge, right? But it is much more known than it was a couple years ago. And I like to essentially use what I've already built and kind of leverage that and keep making it stronger and more valuable. And, this may all turn out to be the wrong decision, but I think when it comes to just the mechanics of all this stuff, this just feels very practical, right? To keep the Sofa brand. And to me, I think this fits in with the Sofa product very well and fits in with the Sofa brand very well. So I don't feel like I'm shoving this into the product. I feel like it actually is a really nice extension. And the last thing is the convenience aspect and the convenience of an all-in-one type app. And there's so many pros and cons and so many ways that you can make a product and design it, develop it, market it, all that kind of stuff. And there's kind of these divides of people who make stuff and maybe enjoy tools that are very focused and single purpose. I'm just going to use this to-do list, and I'm also going to use this notes app and kind of, connect the dots between these two things. And I do that, right? I do that with certain parts of my workflow and stuff for work and personal stuff. And then there's apps that are more kind of all in one, where, hey, instead of jumping around multiple apps, why don't you just use this one app that does 80%, 90% of what you're looking for, or maybe 100% of what you're looking for, depending on your needs, right? I think the consensus within maybe the design development community on the indie side is you should have very, very focused apps. And I think the focus is relative, right? So I think a lot of times people say, oh, the focus has to be on function. But really, when I think about Sofa, it's this downtime organizer, right? Which is kind of a weird term. But really, this intent of is trying to get you to be more intentional with how you use your downtime. And that's kind of a broad mandate in a way. And there's a lot of ways and a lot of directions that can go. And I'm kind of making a bet that I don't think for the types of people that I think want to use Sofa and do use Sofa today, I don't think that they want to be wrangling a bunch of apps to do this stuff. I think that when it comes to their work, they're okay with more complexity and kind of like tying systems together. But when it comes to their downtime, where it's like, I just worked all day and I just want to figure out what to watch, or I just want to listen to a podcast, or I just want to read a book or something, like all those things, like the energy levels are just different when it comes to, work versus non-work stuff. And that's where I think the kind of all-in-one nature of Sofa makes a lot of sense. And I would argue is a very focused approach to solving the problem that people have. Not necessarily this like super focused app that just does one thing, but the overall problems that it's solving. I think I'm very focused on that stuff. And again, coming back to why is a podcast player coming into this? I think it fits into that. I think it fits into the goals that I have for Sofa and the type of tool that it is. And I'm also designing this in a way where, Sofa is actually pretty powerful with a lot of the newer features from Sofa 4.0, right? You have custom categories, you have ingredients, you have smart lists, you have all these things. But I've designed it in a way where, number one, if you don't want to use any of that stuff, it does not get in your way, right? You don't even see it, right? It's just, you can ignore it and be completely happy, and the app can be very, very simple and straightforward. But if you do want to add a little more complexity or enjoy some of these extra features, like the app kind of like grows with you and molds to what you want, which is, I think, pretty nice. So when I think about, I was thinking about all this stuff when it was coming to like, is the Podcast Player a separate app? Because in some ways it would be simpler for me to start from scratch, right, and design an app from scratch, specifically focus on podcast stuff. But I do think it fits into this, and there's a number of benefits that are just so large that to ignore them would be, I think, kind of irresponsible. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully even if you disagree with a podcast player being bundled in with Sofa as opposed to being a separate app, even if you disagree, hopefully this section helps you understand how I got there and why I essentially made that decision. So at this point, you may be wondering, well, when's it coming out? I want it. Give it to me, baby. So I don't have a date yet. I basically need to do, there's like some bugs some known bugs that I'm fixing. And there's a bunch of testing that I need to do with kind of like the backup system and importing, exporting, all that kind of stuff. So basically my plan right now is for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be doing that testing and kind of trying to polish this up as much as possible. Then I will be doing a public beta for this. So if you're not already in the public beta and you want to join, you are welcome to join. I'll have a link in the description where you can get all the information about that. But I'll first be doing a public beta, and I'll just say this, like if you're not comfortable with betas, because like betas are going to have bugs, there's going to be issues, like things aren't going to work well right away. So you kind of have to be like ready for that stuff. If that's not your cup of tea, then just wait. Just wait until it's officially out. But if you're into that kind of stuff, then please join the beta, because I will definitely want and need the feedback from people actually using this, because this is a very large new feature. And there's tons of different edge cases to kind of explore and figure out here. So there's that. So basically my plan is I'm going to be doing a public beta. I don't know how long that public beta will run. It'll run, I look at that stuff as like, it'll run as long as it needs to run, right? And once I feel like things are in a very solid spot, then I will do a public launch. So I don't know if that'll be by the end of this year. That seems unlikely. You know, I had this original goal of like, yeah, I want to ship it in, you know, by the end of 2024. It's probably not going to happen. So let's say early 2025, you know, if everything goes well. But like I said, there's a link in the description for the public beta. And then the last thing I'll say is I do have a newsletter for Sofa updates. So if you just want to stay up to date on how this is going, so essentially like when the public beta comes out or when the official release comes out, all that kind of stuff, there's also a link in the description that I would recommend to sign up for that newsletter. I don't spam stuff. Like I literally will only send an email if I have something to say. So there will be like months that go by where you just don't hear from me because there's nothing to say. But if you want to stay up to date, that's honestly probably the best place to stay up to date on like Sofa updates, the meaningful ones, because I'll send out, you know, an email with that stuff. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'm very excited for this. This is probably the most excited I've been for a new feature in a long time. Not that I haven't been excited for other ones, but like I mean, like so many of us, like I've been listening to podcasts since the iPod days, right? And you would have to download podcasts through iTunes and like plug your iPod in and get them. And the fact that like Sofa can now do that, right? And like I've been listening to podcasts for like the past month in Sofa. I'm like, it's just like, sometimes like life is just really weird, and it's very cool. I'm really excited for this because I find it to be very useful and very fun, and I think it just fits in with the product just really, really well. So anyway, so if you have any feedback for me like immediately, feel free to leave a comment on this video, or you know, message me on Threads or send me an email, whatever you want to do. But yeah, I'm open to any feedback, positive or constructive or negative or whatever. I don't take any of this stuff personally. But thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.